Call this April 1st meeting of the James City County Planning Commission to order. Mr. Holt, please call the roll.
Ms. Knoll.
Present.
Ms. Knoll represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. O'Connor.
Here.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member. Mr. Kropp.
Here.
Mr. Kropp represents the Powhatan District and is this year's vice chair. Mr. Haldeman.
Here.
Mr. Haldeman represents the Berkeley District and is this year's chair. I'm Paul Holt, Director of Community Development and Planning for the county. And sitting to my far, far left is Mr. Max Halavin, our Deputy County Attorney. Mr. Chairman, we have a physical quorum, and tonight we also have a request by 3 commission members to participate remotely. Mr. Rose, who represents the Roberts District, Ms. Leverins, who is an at-large member, and Mr. Polster, who represents the Jamestown District, have requested to participate in tonight's meeting remotely due to medical reasons. Per your adopted policy and consistent with state code, the commission members present must consider their remote participation by majority vote. And we'll need a motion.
May I please have a motion to permit the 3 other commissioners to participate remotely?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Holt, please call the roll.
Ms. Knoll.
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Kropp.
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
As you know, our March 16th organizational meeting was postponed due to the county offices being closed to public use. So I'm going to need, in order to continue that, need a motion to temporarily suspend and set aside Article 3, Section 6 of the Planning Commission bylaws, which call for the annual organizational meeting to occur in the 3rd week of March. That's the first one. May I please have a motion?
You can do it together, Mr.
Them together?
Chair.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And secondly, to amend the current agenda to allow the organizational meeting to take place this evening prior to the public comment section on the agenda.
So moved.
Mr. Holt.
Let me take the first vote, Max, on amending the agenda, and then we take a vote on the actual action. Okay, then we can just do the one roll call vote on both of those 2 items as one motion. Ms. Knoll.
Aye.
Mr. Rose.
Aye.
Ms. Leverins. Leverins, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, I just lost you for a second. Aye.
Okay. Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor.
Aye.
Mr. Kropp.
Aye.
And Mr. Haldeman.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. At this point, with the organizational meeting open, I would open the floor for nomination of chair.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate Mr. Kropp to chair for the upcoming year.
Thank you. Any further nominations? Hearing none, I'll close the nominations. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Polster, Ms. Leverins, Dr. Rose?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. It's unanimous. May I please have a motion for vice chair for the next year?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate Ms. Leverins for vice chair for the coming year.
Thank you. Any further nominations? Hearing none, we'll close the nominations. All in favor?
Aye.
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 It's unanimous. Thank you. With that, Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all for your vote of confidence. I wanted to, before we get into the agenda, just a couple items. First of all, I wanted to take a moment to thank Jack Haldeman for his leadership over the past 12 months. We've had some dicey cases at times, and he's been a calming influence throughout the entire process. So thank you, Jack, for your service. And I'll be getting in touch with everybody as far as committee assignments and Board of Supervisors coverage, but I do want to appoint 2 people tonight. I'd like to appoint Mr. Polster to chair the Policy Committee and Mr. Haldeman to chair the Development Review Committee. And so as I said, I'll be in touch with everybody, and we'll fill those positions on the respective committees, but thank you all very much. We now move on to the public comment period. These are topics not pertaining to any of the cases that will be here that are subject to a public hearing this evening. I'll open the public comment period. If there's any speakers, seeing and hearing none, I will close the public comment period and move to reports of the commission. And I'll start with the policy committee report that was prepared by Ms. Leverins, and then we'll move on to the development review committee. The policy committee met at 4 p.m. on March 5th, 2020. Committee members present were Jack Haldeman, Rich Kropp, Tim O'Connor, and Julia Leverins. Staff members present were Tammy Rosario, Terry Costello, Tori Haynes, John Reisinger, Cheryl Cochet, Jeff Wiggins, and Margot Zeckman. This was the fourth and final meeting of the policy committee to establish the final ranking and scoring for the FY 2021 to 25 capital improvements projects. The committee discussed and agreed on the rankings, and that'll be part of our agenda for this evening. The meeting adjourned at 5 p.m. The policy committee also met at 4 p.m. on March 12, 2020. Committee members present were Jack Haldeman, Rich Kropp, Julia Levins. Staff members present were Ellen Cook, Terry Costello, and John Reisinger. Also present was Mr. Michael Garvin, president of the Williamsburg Beekeepers Association. Ms. Costello presented for Phase 2 committee consideration of a proposed zoning ordinance amendments to address the keeping of bees in residential districts. In a previous meeting, the committee reviewed regulations in other Virginia jurisdictions, as well as the state's best management practices, and recommended allowing beekeeping in all zoning districts. However, Ms. Costello noted that the Board of Supervisors initiating resolution addressed beekeeping only in residential and agricultural districts. So if the Planning Commission, when it gets to the Planning Commission, wishes to open this up to all the zoning districts, that would require the Board of Supervisors to revise their initiating resolution. The committee visited previously discussed restrictions and permitting requirements for beekeeping, and discussed providing maximum protection for adjoining property owners while encouraging beekeeping itself. Staff will draft ordinance language requiring notification of adjacent property owners in reference to and reference best management practices for beekeeping. The committee also commented that they would like the Board of Supervisors to revise their initiating resolution to allow beekeeping in all zoning districts. Mr. Reisinger presented for Phase 2 committee consideration proposed zoning ordinance amendments to address combat tactical training facilities. In Phase 1 of the discussion, the committee agreed with the Board of Supervisors initiating resolution and recommended excluding such facilities from all zoning districts. Other consideration and provisions were reviewed and comparing other jurisdictions. The committee asked staff to prepare a definition of these facilities. The committee reviewed and agreed with staff's definition of tactical combat training facilities. Staff will draft final ordinance language for consideration at a future meeting. And that concludes the policy committee report. If there are any questions. Thank you. Development Review Committee, Mr. Polster.
Yeah. Yes, the Development Review Committee met at 5:30 p.m. on 1 April 2020. The committee members present were Jack Haldeman, Frank Polster, Rich Kropp, and Mr. Tim O'Connor. Staff members present were Paul Holt from the Planning Director. Site Plan 200012 Axe Throwing Lanes Facility at Freedom Park. The adopt a special use permit conditions for this development, SUP 0011 2004 MP 003, requires the Development Review Committee to review any proposal that changes to the master plan for Freedom Park for general consistency. Mr. Michael Stately has submitted a site plan for the placement of an axe throwing lane facility of about 384 square feet at Freedom Park. The proposed facility will be located next to the ropes and within an area currently leased to Go Ape to run the operations by the zip line. Mr. Holt presented the staff report and answered one question on health and safety and insurance liability. Mr. Holt responded that those issues were handled under the Go Ape program. The Development Review Committee voted 4-0 to approve. I'd be willing to answer any questions, and it's also on our consent agenda tonight.
Any questions for Mr. Polster? All right, thank you, Mr. Polster. That's a good segue into the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are normally deemed non-controversial. However, a planning commissioner can pull one for discussion and additional review. There are three on the consent agenda for this evening. One is the minutes of the March 4th, 2020 regular meeting of the Planning Commission. The second item is the proposed Planning Commission calendar for 2020 and 2021. And then the third item is the Development Review Committee action item SP-0020-0012, axe throwing facility at Freedom Park. Is there anyone who cares to pull one of these items? In that case, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, unanimously approved. Thank you all. Now we move into our first public hearing of the evening, fiscal year 2021 to 2025 capital improvement program. Good evening, Ms. Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. After a series of meetings to discuss and evaluate this year's capital improvements program requests, the Policy Committee is forwarding its recommendations for the FY 2021 through 25 CIP for your consideration. This year, a total of 28 projects were submitted, 20 from county departments, 2 from the library, and 6 from the school. Projects total $154.7 million, with $13.9 million of that allocated for FY 21. Committee members used a standardized set of ranking criteria to prioritize each application. This is provided in your packets for reference. Individual committee member scores were then averaged to generate the final project score and ranking. On the screen is the Policy Committee's final project ranking in order of priority. At its March 5th meeting, priorities to serve as a recommendation to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of these priorities to the Board for their consideration in the budget.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes. Any questions for staff? Okay, thank you. I will now open the public hearing. We are not using cards this evening, so if there's any member of the audience that would like to make a comment on the capital improvement program, please step forward. Seeing and hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing and turn to the Planning Commission for discussion and eventual motion on this. Anyone?
I was on the policy committee, so I've been through this before. The list is not in the exact order that I would have had it. It never is. It can't be, I guess. And but we did the best we could with limited resources. Just a couple, and I plan to support it. There's a couple of comments that I made in the policy committee that I'd like to repeat here, though. There are $2.5 million worth of requests for restrooms. Some of them as high as $800,000, and I still can't get my arms around that. The items C and N, the Ambler House and the James Beach Event Park, if they're approved, I hope the utility work is done together, at least the utility connections. The same with L and M, Marina Phase 2 and the Marina land improvements. I've become convinced that doing these together will save money and result in only one marina shutdown. The the library, I accept the need for more library space. And I would have given it a higher number if we knew where it would go. There's just too many loose ends in this application, I'm afraid. So those are my only comments.
Thank you, Mr. Haldeman. Anyone else? In that case, may I have a motion?
Yeah, I'd like,
Go ahead. Go ahead,
if I
Mr.
can.
Polster. Yep. Go ahead, Mr. Polster.
As most of the commissioners know, I've sent a series of emails on the elementary school to everybody to voice my concern about the incomplete application and the not receiving an answer to the questions that were on the application in terms of why did they find not adding additional buildings for the New Beginnings a viable option, and why wasn't it fiscally inappropriate? We never received an answer. And it bothers me that we've kind of been through this before with the school system on the high school and now again the elementary school. 3 years ago, we saw a request within the program for a new high school. This year, the Planning Commission has approved the addition of some buildings into the program as opposed to a brand new facility. And we see this year a new elementary school as opposed to the consideration of putting additional buildings. For $29 million, I believe we deserve a little bit more of an analysis or an explanation of why the school CIP committee decided that that was not a viable option. And what they provided the Board of Supervisors on the 3rd of December in a document essentially said that there were 2 schools that could occur. But why they didn't forward that is a concern that I would like to understand. But obviously it's a little too late at this point. Now, I really don't have a problem with it being down at the bottom of the list. But I just want to make the comment that I think that when they come back next year, they need to have a full disclosure of why that option didn't work. Hello?
Yep, we're still here, Mr. Polster.
Right. In the same way that even though we all supported the library, they provided at least the different options and why. The fact that they didn't select it, I agree with. But the options for the elementary school were never laid out to the same level of detail that's required for a project over $5 million. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much. And just to add to that, the summary of your comments or your concerns will be forwarded to the Board of Supervisors when this CIP packet goes forward as well. Thanks, Mr. Polster. Any other comments?
Thank you.
Just one comment that I'm happy to see some parity in the high schools with the auxiliary gym for War Hill High School. It's also an added benefit that it can be designed to be also serve as an emergency shelter for that end of the county. So I think that might have gotten lost in the mix a little bit, but I think that's a win-win for the school and the county as well.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'd like to make a comment.
Go ahead.
This is the second year that I've been on the policy committee while we reviewed the CIP, and both years we very appropriately, I think, emphasized stormwater and the improvements in the Grove community. So I wholeheartedly support those as both being very high priorities. That's all.
Thank you, and thank you for leading the policy committee through this capital process with a total of 28 applications. It was difficult. It was very thought-provoking, and thank you for your leadership in that regard. Anybody else? In that case, may I have a motion to recommend approval of the prioritized list to the Board of Supervisors for their budget considerations?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend to the Board of Supervisors the fiscal year 2021 to 2025 capital improvement program.
Thank you, Mr. Haldeman. Mr. Holt, would you call the roll?
Mr. Haldeman,
Yes.
Mr. Polster,
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor,
Aye.
Mr. Rose,
Aye.
Ms. Knoll,
Aye.
Ms. Leverance,
Aye.
and Mr. Crop.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next case is Z-19-0003, Ford's Colony Proffer Amendment. Good evening, Mr. Brook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. Ms. Susan Tarley of Tarley Robinson PLC has applied for a proffer amendment for Ford's Colony to address the allocation of remaining units, traffic improvements, and outstanding proffers. Ford's Colony is zoned R4 residential plan community and is designated low-density residential on the 2035 comprehensive plan. Ford's Colony is nearing full build-out. The master plan, not including the continuing care retirement communities on the south side of News Road, allows for up to 3,250 dwelling units. Approximately 2,857 units have been constructed to date, and other lots have been platted but have not yet been built upon. The subject properties listed on the application include those properties where new development is still planned. Specifically, there are 104 dwelling units that remain to be constructed on 4 parcels that have a residential designation on the master plan. The overall purpose and intent of this proffer amendment is to specify the division of these units between the 4 parcels, the remaining traffic improvements that need to be constructed as a part of the build-out of Ford's Colony, and eliminate traffic-related improvements which were listed in the original proffers but which are no longer necessary. Staff finds the proposal to be compatible with surrounding development and consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this application and acceptance of the amended proffers to the Board of Supervisors. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and the applicant is also available over the phone and then also in the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for staff at this point? Thank you.
I have one question.
Go ahead, Mr. Rose.
I was just curious to know why the bike lane was eliminated from the plan.
Yes, so the bike lane is no longer shown on the Long Hill Road corridor study on that side of the road. It is shown as a multi-use path on the north side of Long Hill Road, and therefore the bike lane is thought to no longer be necessary on the side where Ford's Colony abuts.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Before moving on to the public hearing, I'd like to ask planning commissioners if there's any disclosures as far as meetings with the applicants or applicants' counsel.
I had a brief conversation with Mr. Mulhare yesterday.
Anybody else? All right, thank you. I'll now open the public hearing and ask the applicant if they wish to make a presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, and county staff. My name is Drew Mulhare. I'm the general manager for the Ford's Colony at Williamsburg Homeowners Association. Ms. Sue Tarley with Tarley Robinson PLC represents the Ford's Colony Williamsburg Homeowners Association as legal counsel. I'm standing in for the Homeowners Association Board of Directors and our application partners in deference to minimizing our physical presence here tonight. We have submitted an amendment to the Ford's Colony proffers and have been joined in our submittal by Windsor Healthcare Equities, LLC, Dorothea M. Ford Revocable Declaration of Trust, and Reedus Virginia Housing, LLC, the parties who own the remaining undeveloped parcels in the Ford's Colony community. Nearly 2 years ago, county staff contacted the Ford's Colony Homeowners Association to express a concern that the former developer's proffers were delinquent in regards to the required periodic traffic study. Ensuing conversations with staff reflected that no one entity remained that could represent the continuing master plan interests of Ford's Colony, that remaining multifamily parcels could potentially transfer density to the disadvantage of other parcel owners, and that most of the roadway improvements Proffer that were dated in 1987 were either completed or were likely unnecessary based on projected build-out and traffic estimates. Fords Colony Homeowners Association stepped up to address the changes that were necessary to the existing proffers to permit the continued orderly development of Fords Colony as intended by the master plan. We worked with the other applicants and were able to reach agreement on all the issues that have been submitted with the amended proffer. As stated in the staff report, there are no unfavorable factors to our request, and our request does not change the gross density. We are primarily updating the existing proffers to correspond with how Fords Colony has been developed and the remaining areas to be developed. We are very grateful and commend staff for helping to discover a path towards resolution and working amicably with all of us. This is truly an extraordinary action taken by the Homeowners Association and the entities that now own the undeveloped parcels after foreclosures nearly a decade ago. There has been considerable expense in traffic studies and legal fees. However, we are pleased to make this proposal as the right thing to do to help correct an unfortunate situation that had no exit strategy. Lastly, this proposal has been noticed a number of times to the Fords Colony property owners in our monthly magazine, by email, and owner meetings. We respectfully request your recommendation for approval of the amended proffers. Ms. Tarley and I are available for any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mulher. Any questions for the applicant? And including out there in telephone land, any of the other three commissioners, any questions?
I guess I just have one, and it may be more directed at staff, and understanding what Mr. Mulher presented about the distribution of allowable units across the parcels. I guess my question is, if the Ford parcel didn't want to construct 14 units, is there the ability for then some of say they just subdivided and put 4 units in there and there were 10 remaining, could that be distributed across the other parcels, or is it locked in? And
Be happy to answer that if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead while I'm looking it up on my end as well. Go ahead.
The answer to that is no. What would happen is those would be a balance of 10 remaining units per your scenario. The partners have agreed on the 30 units for the Windsor parcel, the 60 units for the Reedus parcel, and the 14 units for the Ford parcel. We've also entered into supplemental agreements with each of the applicant partners that have agreed through a supplemental declaration of covenants density require a master plan submittal, or, an amendment to the master plan to approach the proceedings through this body and the Board of Supervisors if they wanted to increase their density or transfer density.
And that's mirrored up with the language in the proposed proffers that are in your packet. So
that's
it
how I read it. I just wanted
yes, that they've got it locked down on the private side with the covenants, and the way the proffers reads is up to those units. So we could not administratively approve more. It would, at least on the public side, it would require an additional proffer amendment if that's what the parties decided they wanted to do.
All right. Any other questions for the applicant? Thanks, Mr. Mulher.
Chairman?
Any members of the audience would care to address this case? Seeing and hearing none, I'll close the public hearing and look to the commission for discussion or motion.
I would just offer that I understand in talking to Mr. Mulher over the years that this has been an ongoing challenge, and appreciate the fact that we're able to come to resolution. I think that we have a few homeowners associations in the county where, by hook or by crook, either the developer is no longer present or the developer made obligations that have carried on to the homeowners association, which I don't think necessarily rightfully belongs in the homeowners association's bucket. And this traffic count is one of them, because certainly the association is not the developer. And although they gained from additional housing count, they weren't responsible for adding the houses, so to speak. So I appreciate the fact that Ford's Colony's come to an agreement with everybody, protecting all their interests for the 4 remaining parcels, and we can lift that traffic study requirement moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Anyone else?
I have one comment. It's a small comment just in regards to the bike lane, and maybe it's a small issue, but moving forward, something to consider. A multi-use lane is not a bike lane, and I think for cyclists, it's really challenging when they're put on a multi-use lane, and for people who use that to walk their dogs or run, they don't necessarily like cyclists on there. So sometimes those cause more problems than they actually help. But moving ahead, I hope that people consider that a multi-use lane is not the same thing as a bike lane.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Anybody else?
Can we clarify? Doesn't it call for shared lanes in the traffic corridor? That
As part of the corridor study?
right.
Do you remember? I don't know. We'd have to go back and check. Those, for the Long Hill Road corridor study specifically, there was, not to universally answer Mr. Rose's question, but to answer it specific to the Long Hill Road corridor, there were some pretty extensive public input pieces. That was a corridor study that was designed with a lot of public input and a lot of community collaboration by all of the residents along the corridor. And some of those very specific discussions came up about, do the residents along the corridor and do the residents of the county, what is it, what are the sections, what are the elements of the cross-section of the roadway do you want most within that? And so the mixed-use trail recommendation came out as a recommendation from the public versus an on-street bike lane. And I just can't sit here and recall off the top of my head if there was also a recommendation for on-street bike lanes as well as part of a shared facility on the road. We'd have to look into that and give you an update on that at a later point, Mr. O'Connor.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Frank. I participated in those 3 different meetings that VDOT had with a consultant looking at the different combinations to include lighting, multiple lanes, et cetera. And it really was very extensive, and it just didn't happen in one meeting. And the processes that they used really was a very collaborative one, and one that really did involve folks that participated interactively in the exercises that they had. So the decision for that bike lane, and I remember, at least I thought that you had the option to use the road, but the main venue was to be able to use that multi-use. And there was quite a bit of discussion in terms of how wide that was going to be for it. But I can tell you that the community that participated took that issue of bike safety and being able to get to different areas on a bike very seriously, especially the people that were riding bikes already. So my only hope is that we do extend into the phase 2 that corridor all the way out to on the other side of Old Dominion and the Ford's Colony Long Hill exit, so that we have a complete area for people to be able to come down there. That's it.
Thanks, Mr. Polster. Anybody else? If not, may I have a motion? Don't be shy.
I'd like to move that we approve Z-19-0003 Ford's Colony Proffer Amendment.
Mr. Holt?
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Rose?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Ms. Leverns?
Aye.
And Mr. Crop.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Our next case is Z-20-0001, Norge Center Proffer Amendment. And Mr.
It is. It's not Mr. Meadows. I'm going to do my, in our effort to minimize the number of staff that are in the meeting room tonight, I'm going to do my best impersonation and impression. I'm going to cover this one, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Mr. Vernon Getty has applied on behalf of Norge Plaza, Inc. and Chesapeake Bank to amend the proffers to allow for an office use at 115 Norge Lane. The property is currently zoned B1, general business, and professional offices are a permitted use on property that's zoned B1. However, existing proffers on this parcel limit uses to a shopping center. A proffer amendment is necessary since the proposed office use does not fit within that definition of a shopping center. The existing building is almost 53,000 square foot. It has previously served as a grocery store. The currently vacant building will be repurposed, and no new development or construction is proposed other than renovation of the interior of the building. According to the applicant, Chesapeake Bank plans to use the building for its Chesapeake Payments Systems business line. Operations include phone support, electronic communications, or on-site support at a customer's place of business. Chesapeake Bank also plans to use the building to consolidate the call center and other support personnel that are currently located throughout multiple locations in the county. The use of the vacant building would provide for a more efficient space, allow for the pooling of resources, and it would provide this business with room to grow into the future. Staff recommends approval of the application. Staff finds the proposed use is compatible with the B1 zoning designation and the recommendations of the adopted comprehensive plan. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and the applicant's in attendance as well.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. Any questions for staff?
Question about the gas
Pumps?
facility there. What are they, I couldn't find that, and what they were going to do with that or anything in there.
So there's a little bit of an older picture. Those have been demolished.
Oh, well,
That work's
takes care of
already
that.
done as of a
Okay.
couple weeks ago. So
I haven't been up there in a week.
perfect
Okay.
timing, that's right.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff?
I'm not sure if this is a question for staff or for the applicant, but I was wondering about how many employees would be transferred there.
Ms. Leverins, I believe it's 60, according to the information been provided by the applicant.
Okay, so what I was getting at was whether the traffic impact would be increased or decreased, and it sounds like it will be decreased.
Yeah, the traffic situation's going to be much, much better. As we went through and looked through the recommendations of the Institute of Traffic Engineers, let's see, I have my cheat sheet.
402 to 75.
Yeah, 402 PM peak hour trips down to 75. So it'll be substantially
Wow.
improved at the peak hour
Yeah,
because we're moving
that's
from
great. Thank you very much.
from a
Thank you.
retail use to office.
Any other questions for staff? At this point, I'll ask if there's any planning commission disclosures. I'll start off by saying that I had a brief conversation with Mr. Getty and with one of the property owners.
I had a brief conversation with one of the property owners.
And Mr. Chairman, for purposes of the record, I will also let it be known, after the agenda packets had gone out, we had received a letter of support. That letter was emailed to you earlier today. I have paper copies if you would like one, but I wanted to make sure that that got entered into the record.
Thanks, Mr. Holt. I did see that. Anybody care for a paper copy? Okay. Any other disclosures? If not, I'll open the public hearing. Good evening, Mr. Getty.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Vernon Getty, here representing Chesapeake Bank and the other applicant. Also here is Lee Hoagland, the Senior Vice President with Chesapeake Bank, and Tom Tingle, the design architect on the project. We'd be glad to answer any questions you have of us.
I'll kick it off, and the subject of our conversation was because the intensity of this property, the use of this property is changing dramatically, and it has quite an extensive parking lot with pervious cover. I would like to know if the applicant would be amenable to converting some of that asphalt surface, some of that impervious surface into maybe some picnic areas or a green space for employees to be able to take advantage of, to add a little more pervious cover to the site, and then environmentally, adding trees or grasses and shrubs would help regulate the temperature. And also, from an aesthetic standpoint, it would add, I think, be a plus to that area and make it not look like a repurposed grocery store. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, the bank would be willing to do that, Mr. Croft, and has a couple ideas already about things they might do. There's some very nice, large, mature trees and some fairly small. Certainly look great amenity. Answer is yes.
Thank you very much. And I won't ask that it be added as a proffer, but I'll just take the good faith and word of the applicant that they would carry this through. Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Rose, Mr. Polster, Ms. Leverance?
No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Getty. Are there any members of the audience that would like to make a comment regarding this case? Seeing and hearing none, I'll close the public hearing and turn to the commission for discussion or a motion.
I'd just like to commend Chesapeake Bank just for coming in and repurposing a structure. You know, we often hear from folks when we do surveys or have new construction proposed that we have too much empty retail space. So to have the opportunity to repurpose a facility and consolidate their team into one place is, I think, a good thing for them and for the county. So I appreciate it and I'll support it.
I agree. I think a lot of the residents in the Upper County probably were looking for a quality grocery store to go into that place ideally, but the interest wasn't there, and I can't think of a better use for the property than something like this, as Mr. O'Connor said, consolidating operations from several parts of the county and repurposing an existing building. So I also would support that. Any other?
I'd like to say I support that too, being from Stonehouse and going up there all the time. And, you know, it's a growing area, it's a beautiful area, and I'm glad to see that it's not going to sit there in disrepair and fall down and all kinds of stuff happen. So this is a good idea. Thank you.
Anyone else?
For me, this is the first project that I've had an opportunity that essentially falls into the infill category. And to see something repurposed for economic development that's essentially going to bring 60 jobs to the area as opposed to the development of residential areas is a real plus for this program. And I think that with some of the things that the county is trying to do, for example, the widening of that Croker Road and the access to the interstate, I think this makes great sense in terms of an economic development process. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Polster. Anyone else? Not, may I have a motion?
I'd like to move that we approve Z-20-0001 Norge Center Proffer Amendment.
Mr. Holt, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Rose?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Ms. Leverance?
Aye.
And Mr. Crow?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is Planning Commission considerations. We do not have any, and so we'll move into the Planning Director's report. Mr. Holt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. One, I truly appreciate the commission members flexibility and adaptability. We're trying a bunch of new things tonight in order to minimize contact, and seems to have worked pretty well so far. So thank you all for allowing these adaptations, and with the goal of still being able to provide transparency to our meetings. So thank you very much.
Any questions for Mr. Holt on the planning director's report?
Just one curiosity question. Are we still receiving applications and able to process them in timely fashion and just?
Yeah, the county remains open for business. We are maintaining some minimal staffing in office, but thanks to just the continued amazing, wonderful resources that the county has and our great team with our IT department, we have a lot of staff who are able to work from home. It's a little bit different adjusting, working out of a dining room instead of at your office where you can get everything set up, but we're still open for business. It really proves to me the value of the JCC permit link system has proven to be invaluable. It's just a year and a half ago when we went to that online system that allows everybody to conduct that application business electronically, both submitting plans, resubmitting plans, making applications, and even making all of their payments can all be done online. We have some drop-off totes out in front of our building for the paper copies that still need to come in. So it feels like we haven't missed a beat. We might be a little bit slower in moving paper around a little bit, just with some of the normal precautions and recommendations that are in place today. But so far, so good. Again, everybody on the development side has been very understanding, very appreciative. We've made a couple adaptations in how building inspectors are going out to job sites, especially when we're getting requests for building inspections in occupied homes and other places like age-restricted communities, assisted living facilities, those types of things. We're triaging those. We're trying to get as many rescheduled as we can to try to spread them out. We're taking some other precautions, but again, just got a really good support team on staff, and with the staff that we have in place, everybody's been able to keep going as best as we can. So again, many thanks to the development community for understanding, appreciating, and working with us. We're still getting it done as of today, so.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Anybody else, question for Mr. Holt?
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
I have a question. I just happened to notice that there are, 3 applications for tourist homes that are on the spreadsheet that was provided, and that to me just highlights how important it is for us to take a really close look in the very near future at how we want those kinds of applications to proceed in the county. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, one last thing before we leave this item. At the beginning of March, we handed out a draft calendar for your review with all of our placeholder dates. Between March 1st and the version that was adopted to date, I think we had sent out an email just to sort of highlight there was one change to the PC working group in January of 2021. So if you were really, really eager and aggressive and filled out your calendar for all 2 years based on that March 1 calendar date, again, just to highlight, the only change that happened was in that January 21 date where we had a PC working group and a DRC happening at the same day. So we kind of tweaked the times on that. So circle that, make sure you print out and are using the version that was uploaded in Novus that's current as of the meeting tonight, the one that you voted on. But other than that, all the other dates were the same.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. We now move on to Planning Commission discussion and requests. And did you want to talk about a special Planning Commission meeting?
I did. One request, Mr. Chairman. So last week, the Board of Supervisors adopted an emergency ordinance to allow for and to ensure the continuity of government. And within that emergency ordinance, there were several provisions in there on how boards and commissions can operate, and under the emergency ordinance, they have the opportunity to conduct those meetings electronically. Again, all with the effort of trying to minimize in-person contact. We are endeavoring to have, as part of the Planning Commission Working Group on Monday that's coming up, we're endeavoring to do that electronically in accordance with the provisions laid out in the board's ordinance. Because the Planning Commission just adopted that calendar tonight, we are not able to advertise that as a regular meeting. We need to advertise that as a special meeting. So I would respectfully request that a commission member make a motion to have a special meeting of the Planning Commission for the purposes of accomplishing the work of the Planning Commission Working Group on April the 6th at 4 p.m. to be held electronically in accordance with Section D2, which is public meetings, of the board's emergency ordinance on public meetings.
Do I have to repeat all that, or can I just say so moved?
Say so moved.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
And again, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, with that motion and with that being advertised and introduced as a special meeting, again, just to be very clear, while the meeting will be held electronically, the public can still provide input in a number of different ways. One, they can send an email to community.development@jamescitycountyva.gov. We've also set up a public comment hotline, and we'll advertise that on all the agenda materials as well. But that hotline phone number for public comment is 253-6750. And the public can follow along, as the PC Working Group meeting will be televised live, and the materials will be posted on the agenda section of the county website as of tomorrow.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a discussion item or a request?
Just would offer, I pulled up the Long Hill Corridor study, and the preferred alternative cross-section shows that it would be in each direction an 11-foot travel lane and a 13-foot share lane. So it's the preferred cross-section is to have the bike lanes incorporated into the outside lane on Long Hill Road.
Thanks, Mr. Oka. Anybody else? All right.
I had
Go ahead,
two
Mr. Bolster.
comments, if I can,
Sure.
and I didn't get a chance to thank Terry Costello out of the staff for the work that she tried to do to answer my question and trying to find a way to get the documents on that. And I appreciate that effort, especially over the conditions that we're under. The last thing that I have to say is that the process that we have to determine the CIP priorities is a good one. And frankly, my hat's off after seeing and watching the last 2 years of what the policy committee goes through in a very thoughtful way, that it takes the ranking criteria and then it provides then some judgment as to where those things ought to sit. And I understand the process of how that happens, but at the end of the day, you guys do a great job, and so my hat's off to the process that we have, and I certainly am not saying anything that is anything but a compliment to the way that is managed. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Polster. Very much appreciated. Anybody else? Well, as I mentioned, I'll be contacting everybody for Board of Supervisor coverage to see if there's any vacation conflicts and so on and so forth. So that'll take a little bit of time. So as a result, I will cover the April 14th Board of Supervisor meeting in whatever format that's going to be. And so I'll be back in touch with everybody else. Also, before we move into the adjournment phase, I just want to, on behalf of the Planning Commission, just want to thank everybody who's been in harm's way. You know, there's the first responders, there's the medical staff, but even going to the grocery store and seeing the folks working the checkout counters or any number of service industries that are out there, I think they deserve our thanks. So thank you to them. Now, a procedural question for the adjournment. Will we just make this a regular adjournment or adjourn to the PC working group on April the 6th at 4, Mr. Holt?
The latter.
Okay. So that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure since it involves somebody outside of the Planning Commission. But based on that, may I have a motion to adjourn to 4 p.m. on April 6th for the Planning Commission working group?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Thank you all. Stay safe. We're adjourned.